Hello, and welcome to Gardener's World. As winter gradually gives way to spring, all keen gardeners know the thrill of making plans for the year ahead.
You might think that's a really good place to lie, but I'm going to dig that up. Good point.
And for the next hour, we're going to celebrate the dawn of another gardening year by revisiting the stories of some of the most passionate plants people that we've met. Coming up on today's programme, we meet a gardener with more than 1,000 aeoniums.
Now, a friend once said to me, "Don't know what you see in those plants, they don't do anything." Well, they may look a little bit Dinosaurus plodicus, but I can assure you they really are true chameleons.
Nick marvels at an incredible collection of flowering dogwood.
Look at this absolute beauty. This is Cornus cusa Thame, and it's the pinkest of all the Cornus. Now, like its brethren, it comes from Asia, and it's a deciduous shrub.
Advolly tells the tale of one of our most dedicated yet rebellious British gardeners, Ellen Willmott.
Rumour had it that she also carried a loaded revolver and a knuckle duster in her handbag.
And I will be looking at different types of roses and how best to look after them. The gardening year at Longmeadow always starts with a real feeling of optimism. And for me, there is one flower that is truly a beacon for that sense of hope.
Well, I adore tulips. And what I particularly love about them is the way that they introduce this richness of colour that nothing else in spring has. It opens a door of colour that never goes back, and it just is thrilling for the few weeks that they last.
But the garden at Old Bladbean Stud near Canterbury manages to extend the seasons for as long as possible. Rachel visited in early summer to find out how.
It's a garden of many facets, with a wild side where nature romps away. A romantic idyll where plants find their right place, to a formal bordered lawn which has an unexpected twist. It's all the handiwork of amateur gardener Carol Bruce, who's been developing her artistry here over the last 18 years. I must say, Carol, you immediately get the sense that this is the garden of somebody who loves plants. And where does that come from?
I've always loved flowers, ever since I can remember. Just like oxygen to me, they've always been that way, and to surround myself with them feels just the most natural thing in the world.
So at the very beginning, was there a sort of a grand plan?
I always plan everything I do, from the nuts and bolts upwards. It's motivated by the heart, but everything I do is definitely led by the head. So if I don't make sure that the plan is doable, I know that it will end in heartbreak. So it really was a case of discipline myself now so that I don't have to regret having taken on too much in the future.
That's really interesting, actually, something quite unusual. I don't hear that very often. Can I ask what your background is?
Yes, I'm an economist by training. Oh. For me, it's a case of measure twice, cut once.
I think I can learn a lot from you. I feel, Carol, like I'm on a sort of magical mystery tour. I'm just following the path and letting it take me where it wants, really.
You never quite know what's round the next corner. I thought, I wonder if I can make a rose garden which feels like an enchanted glade. And it really does feel that you stumbled into a place where Mother Nature's just gone completely wild with the flowers.
They seem to be old roses, mostly.
They are, yes. Probably 3/4 of the roses are the proper old-fashioned varieties. And the reason people didn't grow them so much these days is because they're very unruly. So with these, I decided I'd train them over these metal domes so that it actually looks like a well-behaved rose bush covered in flowers. But it's normally 3 plants.
It looks like one big one, but you can see the structure there where you've got the stems just sort of bent down. And how exactly do you do that?
Okay, every winter I cut out the 3rd oldest stems and then I tie in the full length of the new stems, arching over so that they make a dome shape. And roses always try and flower as high as possible. So if you lay a stem down as horizontally as possible, it won't know which bud is highest and it will break into flower all the way along the stem.
What about the perennials? Are you still buying perennials? How do you...
No, I never bought any plants, any perennials. They're all grown from seed. And I very much left them to it. I don't deadhead anything. They're all encouraged to self-seed. For me, there are no baddies in the garden. There's only balance.
I've stolen away for a few moments so I can really immerse myself in Carol's planting. She's got some quite unusual plants. There's the Phuopsis just down there with its little sparkly pink flower heads. It's got this wonderful sort of sense of flow and movement. And most impressively, she uses restraint. For example, the geranium, the white geranium, just floats all the way through it. And then she uses aeoniums, and I would be tempted to put 3 or 4 different types of allium in this area, but she's just got the one, Allium Christophii, and she repeats it, and it just pops up everywhere. It's so effective. But it's also considered, and I think that's something quite rare. Carol never waters her garden, and she mulches using only materials from plants cut back in November and strewn around them. Nothing gets taken away and nothing is added. She carries her approach across the garden, but there's another area which couldn't be more different. Goodness me, Carol. I wasn't expecting this. It's so different and very palatial.
It was an opportunity to use perspective and repeat. So both ends and both sides are mirrors of each other. And to do that, I designed 1/4 of it, knowing that it was going to be like butterfly wings. I was going to flip it over. It's designed to be looked along. Obviously, it's 300 feet long. That was the only real way to make use of the shape of the space, to make sure that I had a kind of diorama effect. One of the things that I noticed, particularly in the rose garden, is that having finished it, it had a peak of about 6 weeks, and then the sense of loss is very great. And as I'm out there every day, it made more sense to try and have continuity of the view so that it looked like the same landscape collage and take over from each other in succession.
So that's a really interesting way of having continuity and difference at the same time, because you're sort of building on what's there and just extending that further along.
That's right. I'm almost recreating the same garden with different plants through the season. An example of this is here we have Salvia Maynite, which starts to flower at the end of April, and it's lovely for about 6 weeks. And then as that goes out, I've got Swarovskia Blue Spire, which is coming up and will take over a very similar role in terms of the feathery shapes. And Campanula lactiflora creates tall blue billows, and then tall blue billows is done later by Acidia Little Carlo.
You're clutching something there which looks like...
It's the blueprint.
Ah.
Yes.
The plan. Can I have a look? Give you my arm there.
There we go. Let's see if we can unroll it. It's still got mud on. It's very long. I think of all the gardens that I created, this one needed the most direction in terms of making sure that I stuck to the plan and got to the end of it, because it took me 3 years to grow and plant. And I think I regard my blueprint very much as like the box lid of a jigsaw puzzle. I drew up plant lists by colour and by height. And I actually sat on the stone bench at the end with a blank copy of this graph paper. But it's an exercise in discipline and precision.
Now, I want to know how you manage this garden.
I'm the only gardener. That was always the idea. It really is a way of trying to develop methods whereby one person using the right tools can look after something which looks as if it would take an army.
I think actually it would take most people an army to look after this. I think you're an exception. And it feels to me like a labour of love.
Oh, most definitely. Absolutely.
Roses are a firm favourite of so many gardeners that we feature. But increasingly, we're meeting more and more people with a passion for houseplants.
I'm Johnny Bouchandani, also known as the bearded plantaholic. Welcome to my jungle. Crazy, the man is crazy, is probably 90% of the comments that I get when people come in here. I'm a digital marketing director. Some of what I'm doing is quite creative, even though I do have to conform to looking like a penguin sometimes when I go into work. The idea for me was not only to have it on one level, but have it on two levels. Because like a jungle, you've got the jungle floor, and then as you go up into the house, you've got the hanging plants and the creepers and the climbers that go up to the canopy. And it's the type of plants that have big leaves, that are veined, that have variegation, and that often are climbers or creepers because they just give you that jungle vibe straight away. I managed to get my hands on a albo, a variegated Monstera albo, and a Thai constellation as well. My favourite plants probably have got to be philodendrons. Whether you forget that occasional water or you're a little bit heavy-handed, I do find they're more forgiving than other plants. And not only that, but they're stunning. And with time, as they grow and they climb, they grow bigger leaves, and they really do give you a jungle feel. There's one plant that really does stand out to me, and that's the Florida Ghost. We've got variegation. The leaves come out one colour, which is slightly white, and with time go a little bit green. The shape of the leaves are like no other plant that you've seen. They're completely unique. If the house is burning down, one of the first that I would grab would be that plant. Sometimes it does cheese off the partner a little bit, Charlotte. She's been really, really understanding. Definitely not to begin with.
I'm learning to share him with his plants, that's for sure. But I think over time, probably over the period of like the last 2 or 3 years, it's gone from having 2 or 3 plants to 200 or 300. They've just kind of creeped in. Oh, Johnny, not another one. Oh. And I come home and there's random boxes of new plants.
It can be annoying because obviously it's a house.
The mess,
yeah,
the mess is annoying.
And the soil occasionally, which I do clean up.
His version of cleaning up is different to mine, but you know.
A lot of my money goes into plants, but at the same time, I think to myself, in my own way, I'm not addicted to buying clothes. I don't go out to the pub.
I have actually started to become quite proud of it. When my friends come here, but they're like, Charlotte, this is insane. And now, obviously, it's grown all upstairs and it's taken over the whole house, and they just get a little bit blown away. Like, how do you put up with that? I'm like, I actually quite like it. It's nice, it's relaxing. The kids love getting involved with the plants, but also he's teaching them that, you know, it's good to have a hobby. It's good to be passionate about something. And I think he's a really good role model for them.
To Charlotte's dismay, I bought a greenhouse, 2 metres by 2 metres, and one night while she was sleeping, fixed it all up in her office, obviously. For all plant propagations, it's just the ideal situation. With that climate that's in there, I can just pop it directly into a pot with some soil and it'll root in 2 or 3 days. It's a variegated Adansonii. So yeah, they do really well in humidity. You can see activating all of these aerial roots. We also have some syngoniums. So this is a good example of a milk confettii. So this bad boy here was my first anthurium. It's an Anthurium regale. Absolutely love it. Beautiful coloration, the shape of it as well. These lobes at the top and these striking veins going all the way down, and a sort of velvety appearance. It's actually absolutely incredible. So this is a little prop box. I've got a few of these. It's really good on a budget if you're looking for something to propagate with. It keeps the humidity in, it allows light in because it's all transparent. You'll really be able to propagate things so much easier. Key things that people need to think about is these plants thrive in specific environments. They're growing in substrate that's unique to that place. So if you can try and replicate that, then you're off to a winning start. And secondly, light. Without light, your plant doesn't create any solubles, doesn't create any energy, and won't grow. I do tend to use a humidifier, and it definitely increases to around 70 to 90% the humidity directly in the surrounding areas of that. So all of the plants that do need that tiny bit of moisture and humidity, I will tend to place them closer to the humidifier. It's definitely now a way of life. You're alone with your plants and with your thoughts, and it's that specific time that you have which gives you time to reflect. What's best for my family and what's the best person I can be? So I think it definitely rubs off on your mental health and calms you as well as a person.
All winter, these houseplants have been here in the wooden greenhouse. They're succulents and cacti, and these have been kept protected from frost, but in sunlight. In the case of cacti, that's really important. They do need full sun, whereas the echeveras and the aeoniums need protection from frost. And I've barely watered them all winter. Put them somewhere sunny, but protected from the wind. And obviously not underneath a leaky gutter or anywhere where they're going to get too wet. And then bring them back in September when the nights start to get cold.
Growing indoors is one thing, but a young gardener called Roman from Oxfordshire sent us a film putting a whole new spin on high-rise gardening.
Hello Gardener's World, and welcome to my treehouse garden that I built by myself. So up this post here we have a squash which is climbing its way up the post. There we have a runner bean which is also climbing its way up the post. Got flowers on, and so is this one. So welcome to the inside. In this tray up here, we have microgreens, and then over here we have lettuce, dwarf French beans in 6 of the pots, and then this one is a Scotch bonnet chilli, and then here we have my absolutely massive tomato, which is quite large. I've also got a wormery under here, so let me just lift this up. And in this soil bag here, well, there's soil and worms, but there's also carrot shavings, lettuce, tea bags. You also might be wondering, Roman, how do you get the water to water all these plants? I use my watering system. So the water comes from the roof, down here through this guttering, and then into this pan here. This pan. And then it goes into this container of water. So that's my treehouse garden. And yeah, thank you.
Now, this is a fastigiate hornbeam, Carpinus betulus. And I'm a great fan of fastigiate trees because what it means is their branches, instead of growing outwards, want to grow upwards. And you get these tall, slim trees. And that, of course, means that smaller gardens can accommodate a tree, sometimes quite tall. Now, I planted this, I think about 5 or 6 years ago. I have done nothing to it since. And I'm just lopping it back slightly now the leaves have come in and I can get a good look at it, because it's growing slightly lopsided as the sun on this side is encouraging more growth compared to that side. So I'm going to cut this off. There, mind out, Ned, there's a good boy. That can come off, and this can come off, like that. Let's have a look. That's better. whatever fastigiate tree you choose, and you can get fastigiate oaks, beeches, hornbeams, birches. You can prune them, you can tie them, you can train them, and get them to adapt and fit to your space, however limited that might be. And I tell you, they can look stunning.
If you're looking for something really showy in summer, a great choice for medium-sized gardens is a flowering dogwood. And Nick visited Newby Hall in North Yorkshire that holds a national collection.
Native to Japan and Korea, it's a species within the genus Cornus, which is commonly known as the flowering dogwood. Cornus kousa are hardy, slow-growing, either large shrubs or small trees. They tend to start out pretty columnar in their youth, and then as they mature, they thicken and branch out. This is the straight species, and like the rest of the group, they appear to have these huge white petals. In actual fact, these are a series of bracts or modified leaves. The flower itself is that tiny little thing in the centre. They're not particularly commonly grown in the UK, but actually they do really well here. Look at this absolute beauty. This is Cornus kousa Miss Thame, and it's the pinkest of all the Cornus. Now, like its brethren, it comes from Asia and it's a deciduous shrub. Now, looking in a bit more detail on the flowers, you can see in the centre here these clustered blooms. As you move into autumn, they become pendulous fruits which hang off the plant, and they look like a raspberry that's been inflated. Really extraordinary look, and a beautiful plant in many seasons. Cornus kousa is a plant that really catches the eye. While the flowers are minuscule, the abundance of showy bracts will give a garden stunning displays of colour in late spring and summer, which is followed by magnificent foliage and fruits in the autumn. If you've got a bit more space in your garden, then it's seriously worth considering growing this. It's Cornus non-Manhattan, and it's one of the most popular of all the Cornus. See, it's got that wide spreading format to it, and it's got an AGM, which is an Award of Garden Merit, which is issued by the RHS. And what it means is that it's a good, tried, tested, solid plant. It's got one of the biggest sets of bracts of any of the Cornus. What's really interesting is if you look at the actual flowers in the centre, each one of those is also arranged in a tiny little cross. Here at Newby Hall, over 100 specimens of Cornus have formed a national collection. They've been under the care of gardener Ed Round, who's been working here for 17 years. So, Ed, you've got quite the collection here.
Yes, we have roughly 100 different plants composed of at least 70 different cultivars and 30 species.
So how did it all begin?
Well, it was really all down to the plantsman and owner, Robin Compton, who inherited 3 old plants in the garden, one of which was quite an ailing Cornus florida rubra, and we still have the 2 kousas growing strongly as we speak. The Cornus florida, unfortunately, we have lost.
I've experimented with Cornus florida in the past, and I know lots of other gardeners are a bit wary about it because there are particular challenges with growing it, right?
Yes, yes. We found that most of the North American species have actually contracted a disease called Discula destructiva, which is anthracnose, and it really disfigures the growth and stunts the growth of most of the North American Cornus, Florida being particularly badly hit.
Now, of course, Cornus kousa is Asian and doesn't have any such problem. So in terms of getting them to establish and making sure they're really healthy, what's your guidance on that?
Well, to be honest, it's actually a very easy plant to accommodate, providing you give it shelter and it's not really in too heavy a soil.
And it's sort of often being excessively wet at the root that can be a problem, but there's a way to mitigate that, right?
There is, yes. I mean, if you've got heavy soil, I mean, the ideal answer is to plant on a slight mound. It's a bit counterintuitive and it goes against what you're always taught, but actually only bury the root ball 2/3 of the depth That way you're actually planting on a slight mound, and then you actually cover over what's remaining with a good mulch and keep that mulched for the next few years, just until the plant gets established.
And my understanding with acuses is that they tend to be happier in either a neutral or slightly acid soil?
Yes, you tend to want to avoid chalk or limestone. They are actually relatively tolerant, but as you say, they don't like really strongly alkaline soils.
I love this combination just here, this really bold kind of bluey glaucous-leaved hosta, and I think it looks fantastic with this cornus. This is one called Benny Fuji. It's got that sort of mid-pink note to its bracts. It's also got some very distinct qualities as a shrub. It has a sort of almost, I don't know, Japanese maple look to it. It's got those beautiful layers that sort of stack up through the plant. Of course, they're absolutely capped with flowers as well. And then looking at the individual blooms, as they progress further back into the plant, they get paler and paler and paler, so they're really white right in the centre. And this is one of the smaller Cornus cusa, so it could suit medium or even small gardens. It gets about 3 by 3 metres. When it comes to the foliage, you'll find variation in colour and form, from lime and tiny to deep blue-green and pendulous. This is Cornus Madam Butterfly, and it's a newish introduction, and it's one of those plants that really suits a larger garden because it goes up to about 6 metres. Now, of course, Cornus cusa are renowned for their fabulous and dramatic bracts, but actually lots of them look good in other seasons as well. And so you can see here, this particular specimen has a beautiful patinated bark, and that gets better and better with maturity and the more light that hits the base of the shrub. So if you're looking for a small tree or a large shrub that will provide you fantastic flowering in late spring and summer, followed by spectacular autumn colour and fruits and bark, then Cornus cusa is the plant to go for.
Now, still to come on today's programme.
We visit a grower who can name every single one of her huge collection of aeoniums.
Black magic. Velour. That looks like aeonium blood. Gordonii.
And Advolly sheds light on the fascinating life of Victorian plantswoman Ellen Willmott.
It is claimed that she secretly scattered the seeds of the giant thistle, Eryngium giganteum, in the gardens of unsuspecting fellow gardeners to derail their plans. Hence its common name, Miss Willmott's ghost.
Now, here in the writing garden, I've been making changes. Originally, this was created and planted to try and capture the spirit of cow parsley, because I love the way that cow parsley, with these white umbels of flowers, just floats on this frothy green foliage. And I thought if I could continue that across the seasons so that the flowers would float and dance above the stems, predominantly white, then that would make me very happy. But gradually the shrubs I planted got too big and began to dominate, and I seemed to lose that spirit. So last autumn, I took out a lot of the shrubs, started to add more umbellifers, and that's the process I'm continuing now. And I'm starting with a couple of lovages. Now, one is herb lovage, which I've moved from the herb garden. It can grow to about 8 foot tall, topped by slightly yellowy umbels of flower. And this is a plant which I've never grown before, but it's Scottish lovage, and is a perennial and should be rather interesting. Umbellifers are all plates of flowers, in fact florets, many florets, which are brilliant for insects. Now, I've got another one which I've moved from the herb garden. This is sweet Sicily, and that stays fairly low. It has leaves that smell and taste of licorice. It used to be used as a kind of sugar alternative, and this will grow quite well in shade, so I can put this at the back of the border. Now this, again, is a plant that I've not grown before, but I've always wanted to. Baltic parsley. It's perennial with white umbels, sort of June, July, August time. And these will all grow in light shade as well as sun. I'd like to pretend that it's only years of accumulated knowledge and experience that enables me to plant. The truth is, nothing could be simpler. Make a hole in the ground, stick them in it. Just make sure you've got the height of the top of the container, the same height as the top of the soil, and that really is all you have to do. So that can go in there like that. What's exciting is these plants will, I believe, get back to everything that I wanted from this bit of the garden. And over the years, I've learnt that you start out with really good intentions and clever choices of plants. You look after them well, you do everything right, but it won't last. It will change. Some plants will take over, some plants will die back, some plants won't adapt as well as others. And so you have to keep changing and adapting and monitoring it too. And rather than that being a depressing process, I think it's what gardening's about. Now, we're off to visit the garden of Melanie Lewis from Clun in Shropshire, who has a national collection of aeoniums.
In the 1980s, a friend found one on a compost heap, and so I was presented with this plant and I didn't know what it was. And it took several trips to the library to find out that it was in actual fact an aeonium. And that's where the story started. Now, a friend once said to me, "Don't know what you see in those plants, they don't do anything." Well, they may look a little bit Dinosaurus plodicus, but I can assure you they really are true chameleons. Over the space of a year, they change shape, colour, form. There is always something going on with them. I just think that they are complete and utter characters, and I just think they're absolutely beautiful. Most aeoniums have these wonderful cilia or trichomes that appear around each leaf. They're like little teeth or hairs, and it's really how you can identify an aeonium from other plants. The majority of aeoniums come from the Canary Islands. Every single Canary Island, with the exception of Fuerteventura, has its own species. It's really interesting. They've adapted to each niche environment, and had Darwin stopped off at the Canary Islands instead of going all the way down to the Galapagos Islands, he probably would have come up with the same theory of evolution and needing to bother travelling all that way down there. Sorry. Stupid man. Sorry, I'm turning into Bridget Jones now. They really like to be out all summer long, but you really do need to watch the weather. So as soon as the frosts are over, I start bringing them out. I've got a huge amount of plants, and each plant has to be checked and looked over. I have to make sure that they haven't got any pests or diseases, and that takes me about a month. Come autumn and there's a threat of frost again, back into the conservatory they go, I've got 2 greenhouses, a porch, and anywhere else I can shoehorn them in.
How many aeoniums have you got?
Ooh, probably about 300 different varieties and about 1,000 plants.
Can you name them all?
I think so. Black Magic. Velour. That looks like aeonium blood. Gordonii. Now, this is one of my favourites. This is what we call an arboreum. So this is like a little tree and it has many rosettes on little arms. And when this flowers, its flower will come out of the rosette. And once that has flowered, that particular branch will then die. Here we have an aeonium which is just about to go into flower. You can see this was once the rosette down here, but out from the middle of the rosette has come this flowering spike, what we call an inflorescence. And it's absolutely covered in these little tight buds at the moment, which will open out into a little star-shaped flower. And each flower will be pollinated by bees or butterflies, and in their own habitat, also a little gecko would come along and it would scurry around and the pollen and the seed gets stuck to its feet and then it gets broadcast that way. Luayu, Scarlet, Merry Maiden, Cross Merry Donnell, Mandracorium. Sorry, very wrong. Is that going to be on camera? Hope not. Aeoniums can be really easy to grow as long as you follow a few basic rules. They need to be really free draining. What they really hate is being sat in a dish full of water. That will just kill them, it'll rot them off. I always grow them in a terracotta pot and put some stones in the bottom of the pot, and then I use about 50% grit, 50% peat-free compost. You can leave them pretty much dry over most of the winter, but come February, March, I start to water them again, give them a little bit of diluted feed, and they'll start growing and producing these beautiful colours. The best time to propagate aeoniums would be around February, March, April time, when they're in their growing season. So here we have a really old plant. It's basically had its day. It's got leggy, it's only got rosettes on the end, so really speaking, we need to propagate it. What we'll do is we'll cut off here a rosette with a nice piece of stalk, about 10 centimetres long. Put that to one side and let the wound callus over, like this one. This is one I cut off about a week ago. The wound is now nice and dry, it's not oozing at all, so we can now put that into a nice dry, completely dry, gritty mix. And what you do, you just pop it in, and then you just leave it. Leave it for about a month. By then, it should have formed some roots. I can now pop that up and start watering it, and it will start growing away. If you're just wanting to start out with aeoniums, I recommend growing aeonium velour. A little bit more easier than some of the others, which grows into a nice sort of pyramid Christmas tree shape. It's really quite an easy aeonium to get you started. This is Aeonium Sweet Treats Cornetto. This aeonium comes from California. It's quite possibly the only one in the UK, but I could be wrong. But anyway, it has these beautiful long leaves with really pronounced cilia. Purple fading into green and lots of little babies that come around the edge of the main rosette on the top there. It's an absolute corker. Cornish tribute, Appenditiculatum. Pseudotabliform. Herense. Herense.
Let me put it on the table.
Well, this is my absolute all-time favourite aeonium. It's Aeonium arboreum albovariegatum, and I think she's an absolute beauty. She has this gorgeous limey green centre on each leaf with a creamy outer rim and a little pink blush, but also the rosettes can appear creamy white to a limey green, and it changes colour all year round. It's really interesting. When I think back to my friend passing me the aeonium, I am just absolutely delighted and filled with joy that he did so, because it has taken me down avenues, roads, lanes that I never thought I would go down. And I don't want to ever stop plant hunting and searching for my beloved plants.
Well, I certainly don't think that aeoniums are Dinosaurus ploticus, and they give me a lot of pleasure. I'm actually repotting, not aeoniums, but a similar succulent. These are echeveras, and they come from the other side of the world, whereas aeoniums come from the Canary Islands. These come from the deserts of southern USA and Central America. But they're succulents, and they behave in much the same way. They like really good drainage. Got a mix here that is 50% grit at least. Now, these are desert plants, so the quickest way to harm them, just like aeoniums, is overwatering. If in doubt, just simply don't water, because they don't feed off water from the roots. They take up water from the roots, store it in the leaves, and then draw upon it as they need it. So as long as the leaves are not drooping and are pumped up and fleshy, then they've got all the water they need, even if the soil is absolutely bone dry. Now, these are not hardy, so they do need protection against frost and too much rain. And then they can stay out all summer and come back into here round about to the middle to the end of October. Now, Ellen Willmott was one of gardening's great characters. But the truth is that we don't really know that much about her. And Advolly visited Spetchley Park in Worcestershire to find out more about her story.
Records of garden history are peppered with figures who over the years have shaped landscapes across the UK. You've probably heard about the heavyweights, people like Vita Sackville-West and Gertrude Jekyll. But amongst these is another equally influential plantswoman, and we really should know a lot more about her, Miss Ellen Willmott. In fact, Jekyll wrote that Willmott was the greatest of all living women gardeners. Ellen's own 30-acre garden at Whalley Place in Essex was once one of the most beautiful in England. Sadly, the house and garden were demolished long ago. But Ellen also had a great deal of influence on the gardens here at the Spetchley Park estate, which was the marital home of her sister Rose. Despite her gardening genius, Ellen's reputation is eclipsed by accounts of her eccentricity, such as booby-trapping her prized plants to frighten off thieves. It is claimed that she secretly scattered the seeds of the giant thistle, Eryngium giganteum, in the gardens of unsuspecting fellow gardeners to derail their plans, hence its common name, Miss Willmott's ghost. Rumour had it that she also carried a loaded revolver and a knuckle duster in her handbag. But a recent find sheds more light to the real story. Archivists unearthed trunks stuffed full of things, piecing together a more detailed account of Miss Ellen Willmott's life. It starts in the mid-1800s. Ellen Willmott and her younger sister Rose were born to comfortably well-off parents. The sisters were fortunate, not just in coming from a well-to-do family, but in also having a very generous, childless godmother, because when she died, she left the sisters the equivalent of £12.5 million each. But they'd never really been taught the value of money, and Ellen just wanted to spend, spend, spend. Together, they bought a property in the Alps. With money no object, they transformed it into a paradise, bursting with trailing roses, vines and arches smothered with clematis and wisteria. They also had a place in Italy and designed the garden immaculately in the local style. Rose soon went on to marry and start a family. But the sisters remained close. They would have discussed their gardens at length and exchanged cuttings, seeds and bulbs on a regular basis. Rose was a skilled plantswoman herself, but her talent has been overshadowed by Ellen's notoriety. However, these gardens and grounds are a legacy to both sisters. Theirs was an era when great plant hunters like Ernest Wilson brought exotic specimens back to the UK. Some of these trees would have come from expeditions that Ellen funded. Wilson returned from one such trip with 2 ceratostigma seeds, and knowing Ellen's talents, he entrusted her to grow them. But one of Ellen's earliest passions was daffodils. Her reputation led to her appointment to the RHS Daffodil Committee, forging her way into a man's world. And she won many medals, not only for daffodils, but also for tulips. And there's even one here from the Chrysanthemum Society. She was at the top of her game. So why do we know so little about this brilliant gardener? Ellen Willmott's fall from grace can be traced back to 1897, and an event that should have been the pinnacle of her career. Ellen was set to receive the RHS inaugural Victoria Medal of Honour. Only 60 people could hold that honour at any one time, and she was to be one of just 2 women to be awarded, including Gertrude Jekyll. And yet she didn't turn up for the ceremony. The no-show was seen as the rudest of snubs, and Ellen was shunned from that day onwards. Nobody even bothered to question why Ellen wasn't there, but the letters found here at Spetchley Park recently may have the answer. They revealed her deep attachment to a Miss Georgiana Jeanne Tufnell. Jeanne was a close friend of Ellen and served as lady-in-waiting to Princess Mary Adelaide. The letters suggest that Ellen and Jeanne were deeply in love. But in the Victorian era, same-sex relationships would not publicly have been acknowledged. But just as Ellen was readying herself to receive her Victoria Medal of Honour, she received some shocking news. Jeanne announced her engagement to a man 35 years her senior. Ellen must have been heartbroken. she became increasingly remote and obsessive. Her lavish spending started to spiral out of control. Worse still was the death of her sister Rose in 1922. Rarely caught off guard, Ellen poignantly said, "Now there is no one to send the first snowdrops to." By the end of the 1920s, the money had gone, and in 1934, Ellen died alone. But what about those myths? Did she really set booby traps in her daffodils? Well, actually, she did, because at that time, it took about 12 years to create a highly sought-after daffodil, and she had to protect her investment. Did she maliciously sabotage other people's gardens by scattering the seeds of that spiky aeonium? I doubt it. I think she just wanted everybody to have this beautiful plant in their garden. Did she carry a loaded revolver in her handbag? It would seem so, and a knuckle duster. Because having lost all her money, she had to sell all her carriages and rely on trains. So these were for her personal protection, walking along dark country lanes late at night. Ellen Willmott pushed the boundaries of women's roles. She cultivated thousands of species of plants, many of which are named in her honour. Yes, she had her quirks, but that really shouldn't overshadow her legacies. Ellen's achievements in botany and horticulture really should have made her one of the trailblazers of her age.
Well, I'm afraid that's it for today. But I'll be back here next week with plenty more Gardener's World highlights to enjoy.
So until then, bye-bye.